In October 1084, the army of King Philip of France crushed a smaller Angevin force in the county of Blois. It was the beginning of the king's conniving plan to steal away the county of Tours from Duke Fulk of Anjou, his own vassal. Amid such a festival of power abuse, jealous rage and Angevin bashing, Robert of Normandy was quite at home. He was in Anjou proper, breaking open the walls and forts of the district with his late father's army. This would help his king none, but he was not there for the king. Perhaps the lowest Norman peasant would be impressed by their duke's loyalty to his liege, but Robert's true intentions were not exactly hidden. He campaigned through Anjou, and at each settlement he came across he would single out the leading citizens and make them an offer. Sign a letter begging him to take over as their duke, or see their homes razed in the name of the glorious and divinely inspired king of all France. Soon he had evidence that to deny the people of Anjou his leadership would be a far greater sin than to covet his neighbour's mules and more, for look at how so many were begging for his protection. With the Anjou forces destroyed by the king's successful campaign for Tours, all Robert needed to do was get a few mailed bodies out there with his banner, and the county was as good as his. But there was one man who didn't believe the claims of the hastily sewn compendium of beggary Robert flaunted. His name was Guillem, and by Robert's poor fortune he ruled the prosperous duchy of Toulouse, a duchy with men and mind to stop the Norman toddler from snatching that which hung above his cradle. Another foul trick of fate this was. He had seen many hundreds of his men killed pacifying Anjou, and these olive-eating Toulousans would have there be no reward. It was in times like this that Robert would quickly run out of people to moan to, and end up moaning in a violent whisper to God. God, though, had taken far too many liberties of late, so Robert instead found that certain girls in certain parts of just about any town could be paid to listen to one moan all night. The poor coin consorts got more than they bargained for, but at least it lightened the Duke's mood. It taught him a very important life lesson too. Love can be bought. Duke Guillem awoke one morning to a visit from a belle of Rouen, sent rather out of her depth to present the Duke a fine platter of golden horse figures. Alas, he had a dozen of those already, but he was impressed all the same with Robert's taste in messengers, and goodwill was bought one way or another. Maybe Robert wasn't as unlikable as he came across at feasts, Guillem thought. But really such thawing did nothing to remove his obligation by marriage to uphold Fulk's claim to Anjou. Robert, never having considered a single obligation to be beyond ignoring, tried a new angle. His court chancellor, Gerbeau, successor to the happily retired Orderic of Maine, had proven himself a silver-tongued preacher of Robert's self-assessed virtue. The king had shown interest in the tales of Robert's slaying of a German lord with a mightily thrown spear, his pacification of a rebellious mob with an infectious, warm-hearted laugh, and there was even some play to be had for the tale of the stray Bresian manticore slain with only a sharpened chicken leg bone. It was all good dinner-time entertainment, if nothing else. Now this chancellor arrived in Toulouse to put yet more bards out of work. Duke Guillem was impressed at the artistry of these Norman boasts. Usually people insisted on their own greatness in a far more obnoxious fashion. But was he willing to stain his honour by ignoring a call to arms? Absolutely, positively not. It was time to give up on the dream, and all could see it. Robert knew what to do. Clench the sword at his bedside and dream harder. If there was to be a war between North and South, then he was going to win it. He would rally all the Norman lords and gather a grand army that could deliver him victory. Most importantly of all, the army should contain as many troops as possible from the estates of his brothers, for if the war was to be hard fought, it should be the men of the Pretenders who were given up to God. Richard had made some half-committal promise that he would send a force that included, curiously, 24.5 archers, on account of one being for want of legs below the knee. Furious upon reading the letter, Robert threw his sword at a nearby chair, striking it in such a strange fashion that it flipped over and cast the weapon back the way it had come, bruising its master on the forehead. A few days later, Richard awoke to find a rather tired-looking Belle of Rouen wielding a stained pillow covered in barely used golden model horses. It came with a closely themed promotion to Master of Horse in the Norman court, an ultimately meaningless but well-received gesture. With his brothers as good-spirited as they could be paid to be, it was time to begin Robert's first big boy military campaign. Any further delay would allow Duke Fulk to recover his strength. As summer waned in the year 1086, the Norman army was assembled, come what may. 2 years on from the last war, Anjou was in no shape to fight. Fulk the Cruel had stitched together a small army of undesirables to ensure he was not said to be hopeless, but they were quickly defeated by the Norman host. However, as the Normans prepared to capture their quarry in Anjou, the promised Toulousan army was reported to be on the move, with numbers to match or even exceed their own. Duke Guillaume had no particular interest in helping Fulk, not even a grudge against keen-eyed Robert. He was there to show the rest of the kingdom that his realm was just as fit to be known as the strongest duchy as Normandy was. Hence, he marched not for the battlefields of Anjou, but for the Norman capital at Rouen. Robert, currently residing at said capital, and now on a bound to stay there, sent messengers of all natures to the army camp to secure the force's return. He heard nothing back, but in this case, no news was good news, for it meant that his commanders had wisely ignored the panicked orders of the man behind 1,000 tons of stone walls. They marched east, for word was that the Toulousan rearguard was trailing the rest of the army after getting lost amid the landmarkless plains of the northern countryside, not helped by the fact that French armies were marching all over the place in preparation for another of the king's campaigns against the Muslim warlords of the south. Somewhere in the mix, the Normans chanced upon and consumed their foes, turning Blois into a battlefield once again. 400 Toulousans were killed, but the remainder had been tipped off as to the location of their compatriots by the Normans chanting about saving Rouen. They scurried north, with the Normans in pursuit, but they reached the siege camp of their main force without incident. That left the two armies camped next to each other, with the lord of the land screeching for help from the walls of Rouen Castle so piercingly that the Norman soldiers were humiliated into fighting the Toulousans, if only to eliminate the witnesses to the shameful display. The two sides formed up as if there was a great mirror between them. The armies were near identical, the ground was flat and the sun was high. Nothing looked stronger about one force or weaker about the other, and so things continued to be as the fighting commenced. Blow for blow, man for man, inch for inch they fought, their fates in lockstep, their troops withering amid their becalmed formations. The battle concluded with 500 dead on both sides, and little else achieved. Only the arrival of fresh men from Anjou persuaded the Normans to draw away, now slightly outnumbered and thoroughly depleted of strength. With the Toulousans feeling the same, the only thing chasing the Normans from the field was the great rasp of the man in the high tower. While it seemed that the Normans had been bested, Robert found another chance to invest in a change of fortune. A group of mercenaries, the Catalan Band, had apparently come ahead of the Toulousan force in preparation for just such a moment as this. After waiting for their potential client to become desperate, they delighted in offering their Toulousan killing service, a service that was well practiced and came well recommended by Guillaume's enemies in Occitania. Robert had the golden diadem left behind by his mother, late of a few months prior, smuggled from the castle, and with that he had 1,800 men at his disposal so long as further golden objects followed suit. The united force of Normandy and Catalonia now took on the united force of Toulouse and Anjou, pressing their dearly bought advantage in battle and lifting the siege of Rouen. Finally, Robert's men could join him in a screech of victory. Most of the invading force was still alive, so the victorious allies pursued the Angevin banner south to Bourges, where an exhausted foe gave them little trouble in a second battle. The Toulousains, despite the loss of more than half their number, rallied not far from where they were broken and marched northwest back to Normandy. Such defiant courage went unnoticed, for the Normans were under orders from Robert to kill every last Angevin they saw, and the ones they saw had fled back towards Rouen in a blind panic. With something that smelled faintly of victory afoot, Robert was able to stop rummaging through the chests and shelves of his courtiers in search of more jewellery. His family's wealth reduced to a single wooden box of apparently unwanted golden horse models, he dismissed the Catalonians. His troops wintered in Rouen, but it was not a peaceful winter, for the wandering army of Toulouse returned to try their luck again. Alas, they were as long out of luck as they were out of food, and 1 in 3 did not stumble back from that venture in good health. Those that lived would see the Normans in battle again before this war was over. They returned to Anjou via an unsure route, arriving to find Robert's army was again waiting for them amid the unchecked slaughter of the scant company still marching in the name of Fulk. It would be a long time before another Toulousan was seen in Normandy after that. What remained now was the relatively peaceful part of the war, starving out Fulk's last supporters, a year's work at least. Robert could finally breathe and stop poring over the maps and memorizing details of the soonest ship to depart for some far-off land. Indeed, he felt like his fortunes must be improving, for his whole view of the world seemed to have changed. Was this what it meant to be a man of honour? No longer did he look out over his dining table and see the gilded bowls and silver chalices. He saw only his honest and hard-working family and court, glaring back at him with what could only be envy for his achievements. As you might have guessed, he actually was still seeing the world with the same dull-eyed clarity as before. His ambition had quickly cleared the table of its finery, just as it had the whole castle. In fact, the only shimmer of light one could see was the knife in his good sister's hand, clutched tightly as she asked again through weathered teeth what Robert had done with their late mother's precious golden diadem. Not believing the claim that a bird had stolen it, she shot up and raised the knife above her head with a growl that awoke the slumbering guards by the door. It was only a passing murderous rage, as it were, but its cause would not be forgotten. Indeed, as Robert sat back to wait for another victory to be delivered to him, forces were at play to ensure that nothing like this idiotic war ever happened again.